If there's one thing we know about death row, it is that the condemned receive a last meal request. These requests are usually quite basic, but you would not believe so if you heard examples of the strange meals that are requested. There is basically nothing within reason that you cannot request. Before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything we post. So without further ado, here are the strangest last meal requests on death row. Timothy McVeigh requested ice cream as his last meal. We all know Timothy McVeigh killed 168 people, including children, when he drove a truck laden with explosives into the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building on April 19, 1995. He did this apparently because he said the federal government overreached their handling of the Ruby Ridge incident and Waco siege. His last meal? Of everything he could have asked for, he asked for 2 pints of mint chocolate ice cream. A remarkably simple meal for someone with such an appetite for murder. Pun intended. Ronnie Lee Gardner wanted to watch Lord of the Rings with his final meal. Ronnie Lee Gardner murdered Melvin John Otterstrom in October 1984 during a robbery in Salt Lake City, Utah. Whilst he was being transported to court hearing, Gardner tried to escape and shot his attorney, Michael Burdell. He spent 25 years on death row actually appealing his case, but was executed by firing squad anyway in Utah State Prison in June 2010 at age 49. He appealed so many times that the Utah House of Representatives decided to limit the number of appeals allowed in capital cases in the future. His last meal consisted of lobster, steak, vanilla ice cream, and an apple pie. As part of his final meal, he insisted that he wanted to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy while enjoying his massive feast. Ricky Ray Rector wanted to save some of his meal for after his execution. Ricky Ray Rector murdered Arthur Criswell after he and a group of friends were refused entry to a restaurant in Arkansas. He also wounded 2 other people in the vicinity. After the murder, Rector went on the run, hiding in woodlands and also with family members. He was convinced by family to confess, but agreed to do so only if he could confess to Officer Robert Martin. Instead of carrying out the confession, he shot Martin inside of his mother's home. He then attempted to end his own life by shooting himself in the head. This suicide attempt did not work out as he planned, so he ended up only seriously wounding himself in the head instead. For his final meal, he requested steak, chicken, cherry-flavored Kool-Aid, and a pecan pie. While he was being escorted to the execution chamber, Rector apparently told his guard that he was saving some of his meal for later, which kind of gives us the idea that he had no idea where he was going. Stephen Michael Woods Jr. attempted to eat himself to death. This case was shrouded in controversy. Stephen Michael Woods Jr. was tried and convicted of the murders of drug dealer Ronald Whitehead, age 21, and Bethina Braz, age 19. Marcus Rhodes, his co-defendant, had actually pleaded guilty to the crime, and evidence placed him at the scene where the crime was committed. There was no evidence to link Woods to the crime, and he pleaded not guilty. Rhodes only received a life sentence while Woods was sentenced to death. There were many protests to halt the execution of Woods. Unfortunately, these protests were unsuccessful. Woods' last meal request included 4 meat pizzas, 2 hamburgers with bacon, fries, 12 garlic breadsticks with marinara sauce, 2 pounds of bacon, 4 fried chicken breasts, 2 pints of ice cream, 5 chicken fried steaks, 2 Pepsis, 2 root beers, 2 Mountain Dews, and 2 sweet teas. Obviously, there was no way he could ever consume all that food. Woods was still protesting his innocence in the execution chamber, stating that those attending his execution were about to watch a murder rather than an execution. He was executed by lethal injection. Angel Nieves Diaz wanted no last meal. Diaz was a Puerto Rican who was sentenced to death for the murder of the manager of a strip club, kidnapping, and armed robbery. He maintained his innocence until his death. Angel Diaz was put to death in Florida by lethal injection at the age of 55. The other robber who had apparently acted together with Diaz only received a jail sentence. Diaz declined a last meal, so he was served the regular prison meal, which he declined to eat as well. The prison meal consisted of shredded turkey with taco seasoning, shredded cheese, rice, pinto beans, tortilla shells, apple crisp, and iced tea. One would think that if a person sentenced to death could have anything as his last meal, he could have the right to have nothing as his last meal as well. Thomas J. Grasso did not get what he asked for. Thomas J. Grasso murdered 87-year-old Hilda Johnson on Christmas Eve 1990 when he broke into her home and strangled her to death with her Christmas tree lights. After the murder, Grasso stole a measly $8 from her purse, $4 in change, and her television set, which he sold for $125. This revolting crime was just the beginning of a string of heinous crimes committed by Grasso. Grasso and his wife Lena moved to New York 6 months later. It was then that he murdered 81-year-old Leslie Holtz and stole his Social Security check. He requested the following for his final meal: 2 dozen steamed clams, 2 dozen steamed mussels, a Burger King double cheeseburger, half a dozen barbecue spare ribs, half a pumpkin pie, whipped cream, diced strawberries, and 2 strawberry milkshakes. Strangely enough, he also ordered a tin of SpaghettiOs with meatballs, which he demanded had to be served at room temperature. He was served spaghetti instead. Just before he was executed, he used the chance to utter his last words, to complain to the press about the fact that he did not get his SpaghettiOs. I think most of us agree that we are glad glad he did not get his SpaghettiOs. Lawrence Russell Brewer did not touch his food. Lawrence Russell Brewer and his co-defendants committed one of the most heinous hate crimes in history when they murdered James Byrd Jr. These three white supremacists tied Byrd to the back of a pickup truck and dragged him for 3 miles behind the truck on an asphalt road in Jasper, Texas. Reports indicate Byrd died halfway through the journey when his arm and head were severed. Brewer's co-defendant John William King remains on death row, and the other co-defendant, Sean Allen Berry, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Brewer's last meal request was for 2 chicken fried steaks, a pound of barbecue meat, a bacon double cheeseburger, a pizza, a pint of ice cream, and some fudge. The strange part of all this is that Brewer did not touch his meal. Brewer was executed by lethal injection by the state of Texas in 2011. This clown, John Wayne Gacy, wanted food from the places he had managed. Serial killer and rapist John Wayne Gacy was put to death in Illinois by lethal injection at the age of 52. The killer clown, as he was known, was sentenced to death for 33 counts of rape and murder of young men and boys. He regularly performed at children's hospitals and charity events as Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown. He would lure his victims into his ranch house near Norwich, handcuff them under the pretext of showing them a magic trick, then sexually assault and murder them. Most bodies were buried on his property. His final meal consisted of 12 fried shrimp, a bucket of original recipe KFC, French fries, and a pound of strawberries. Gacy was the manager of 3 KFC outlets. Victor Harry Feguer seemed to like olives, or not. Feguer went through the phone book phoning physicians until he found one that was willing to make a house call to treat a female patient who never existed. Feguer managed to persuade Dr. Edward Bartels to make the house call. He then abducted and killed the doctor across state lines in a field with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Victor Feguer was tried and convicted of murder in federal court for his crimes. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Feguer submitted an appeal, but it was denied. At that time, only President John F. Kennedy could have commuted his death sentence. Iowa's then Governor Harold Hughes, a death penalty opponent, contacted Kennedy to request clemency for Feguer. Kennedy seemed to have thought that the crime was so brutal that the request for clemency was denied. What was Feguer's last meal request? A single olive with the pit in, nothing more. James Edward Smith was into dirt. Yeah, really. In 1983, James Edward Smith, a former voodoo priest, cab driver, and tarot card reader, was sentenced to death for the armed robbery and consequent murder of Larry Rojas, a Missouri insurance agent. Smith repeatedly protested his innocence by stating, "I myself did not kill anyone," on several occasions throughout the trial proceedings. He also claimed to have been directly involved in at least 6 ritualistic killings across the country. He was executed in 1990 by lethal injection. He seemed to accept his fate and was happy for it to happen while on death row. His mother, however, spent a long time trying to appeal his case, saying that he was not competent to waive appeals. Here's the doozy. For his final meal, he requested a pile of dirt so that he could perform a voodoo ritual. Needless to say, the pile of dirt was not delivered, and instead, he was given yogurt. Well, eventually he received 6 feet of dirt, so in a way, his wish came true. In conclusion, food is one of our greatest pleasures. How strange that we would grant great pleasure to some of the worst people who have walked the face of this planet before we execute them. Even stranger is that when offered the last pleasure, death row inmates would sometimes forego this privilege. Better yet, why waste food in a world where so many people are hungry on people who do not care about others anyway? Just asking. On that bizarre note, I end this video for today. Please join us again.